The sun was setting behind the city skyline as I walked across the street, the bustle of rush-hour traffic fading into a dull hum. I barely noticed the car until it was almost too late, its tires screeching as it swerved, clipping me violently. I hit the pavement hard, the world spinning in a nauseating blur. In the haze of pain and shock, I heard voices. One was desperately calling for an ambulance, the panic unmistakable in their tone. As my vision cleared, I recognized the driver kneeling beside me. It was Eric, my wife's co-worker, whom I had met at several office parties. His face was pale, eyes wide with fear. "David, man, I'm so sorry, I didn't see you," Eric stammered, his voice trembling. "Help's on the way," another bystander reassured me. In the hospital, while nursing a broken leg and a bruised rib, I tried to piece together why Eric had been so shaken, beyond the accident itself. A visit from Detective Martinez a day later brought everything into sharp, painful focus. "We found something unsettling," Martinez said, flipping open his notebook. "Eric wasn't just your average distracted driver. We have reasons to believe this might have been intentional." "Intentional?" I echoed, the words slicing through the fog of medications. Martinez nodded gravely. "We're investigating all angles, but something came up during our initial questioning. He mentioned your wife, Linda." The room seemed to spin again, this time not from the injury, but from the betrayal that tinged his words. I pressed for more, despite the dread building in my stomach. Martinez hesitated, then leaned forward. "Eric claims Linda knew about this. He suggests she planned it with him, something about a trip to the islands, financed by." He trailed off, but he didn't need to finish. I understood. "My life insurance." Over the next few days, anger simmered beneath my shock and pain. I had to confront Linda. The night I returned home, I found her in the kitchen, her back to me as she cooked. "Linda," I began, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. She turned, a smile faltering on her lips when she saw the grim set of my jaw. "Dave! You're home. How are you feeling?" Her voice was light, too light. "I met Eric," I said flatly, watching her closely. Her smile vanished, replaced by a sudden pallor. "Eric? What about him?" "He drove the car that hit me," I continued, each word measured and heavy. Linda's hand shook, and she gripped the countertop for support. "Dave, I know, Linda. About the plan. The islands. The insurance money." The silence that followed was suffocating. Linda slumped, her eyes glistening with tears or perhaps guilt. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand to stop her. "No. I've heard enough. We're done here, Linda. I want a divorce." The next weeks were a blur of lawyers and bitter accusations, but I stayed focused on my goal, to dismantle the life we had built together as a punishment for her betrayal. Once the divorce was finalized, I cut all ties, leaving Linda to grapple with the ruins of her plans. As I started over, the weight of her deception lingered, but I was free from the web of lies she had woven around us. Now, I could begin to rebuild, on my own terms. The cold breeze of early fall whipped through my jacket as I stood outside the courthouse, the final decree of divorce in hand. My heart was a mix of relief and hollow victory. Linda hadn't shown up, her lawyer did all the talking, a clean, emotionless transaction. As I walked down the courthouse steps, my phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. "Meet me at Cafe Verona. There's more you need to know." Curiosity piqued, I headed towards the cafe, a quaint little spot we used to frequent during simpler times. Pushing open the door, the warm smell of coffee and pastries enveloped me, a stark contrast to the chill of the betrayal that still clung to my bones. Eric was already there, seated in the far corner, looking every bit as ragged as I felt. As I approached, he didn't look up, his eyes fixed on the steaming mug in his hands. "You said there's more I need to know," I said, taking the chair opposite him, my tone cautious but demanding. Eric sighed, his gaze lifting to meet mine, a flicker of regret passing through his eyes. "David, I'm sorry. About everything. I was used. By Linda. Used? I echoed, skepticism lacing my words. He nodded, leaning in closer. Linda didn't just plan to get your insurance money. She's been laundering money through her company for years. She opened her mouth to speak, confronted her, and she convinced me that if I helped her with you, she'd let me out. Clear my debts. The revelation hit like a second blow, deeper and more sinister than I had imagined. You expect me to believe that? I have proof, Eric said, pulling out his phone. He slid it across the table, a series of emails opened, detailing transactions and offshore accounts, all linked back to Linda. My mind raced as I scrolled through the evidence. Why come to me now? I asked, a part of me still wary. Guilt, he admitted, his voice low. And fear. She's dangerous, David. More than either of us knew. I pocketed my phone, the weight of the information heavy in my pocket. What do you want from me? Help me expose her, fully and finally. She can't just walk away from this, Eric implored, desperation creeping into his voice. I paused, considering the tangled web of lies and deceit. Linda had betrayed me, but this was bigger than a broken marriage. This was criminal. Okay, I finally said, determination settling in. We'll take this to the police. But I'm doing this for justice, not for revenge. Eric nodded, relief briefly smoothing the worry lines etched deep in his face. We left the cafe together, the plan to end Linda's deceit taking shape. As we stepped into the chilling wind, I felt a flicker of hope. The road to retribution was uncertain, but I was no longer walking it alone. The clang of my apartment door shutting echoed louder than usual in the silence of the evening. I had just returned from a clandestine meeting with a private investigator I'd hired to dig deeper into Linda's affairs. The evidence Eric had provided was damning, but if we were going to the authorities, we needed everything airtight. My phone rang, shattering the silence. The screen flashed an unfamiliar number. Cautiously, I answered, "Hello?" "David, it's Linda," came the icy reply, her voice a chilling blend of anger and composure. My grip on the phone tightened. "Linda. What do you want?" "There's been a rumor going around. About you and Eric conspiring." Imagine my surprise, she said, her words laced with venom. "I don't know what you've heard, but..." "Save it, David. I know you two are up to something." "What is it? Revenge? Redemption?" She scoffed. "You think you can play at my level?" The threat in her voice was palpable, and it spurred a mix of anger and defiance within me. "I'm not playing, Linda. This is about justice. For all the wrongs you've committed." There was a pause, a momentary silence that felt like the calm before a storm. "You have no idea what you're getting into. Back off now, or you'll regret it." The line went dead, leaving a buzzing silence. I stood there, phone in hand, the weight of her threat sinking in. This was no longer just about exposing a betrayal, it was about bringing a criminal to justice. Later that night, Eric and I sat in the dim light of a back booth in a nearly empty diner, plotting our next move. The table was strewn with papers and digital records, the glow of my laptop casting shadows on his determined face. "We need more than just financial records and emails. We need something that ties her directly to any illegal activity," I murmured, scrolling through the digital evidence. Eric nodded, sipping his coffee. "I've got a lead. One of her contacts, someone deep in the laundering scheme. He's willing to talk, but he's scared. We meet him tomorrow." "Where?" I asked, the sense of urgency growing. "An old warehouse on the docks." "He says it's neutral ground," Eric replied, his eyes scanning the dimly lit diner. "Sounds risky," I commented, the possibility of a trap not lost on me. "It is. But it's our best shot at nailing her with concrete evidence." The next day, under the grey overcast sky, Eric and I approached the warehouse. It stood isolated, the sound of water slapping against the docks playing a grim soundtrack. We entered, our steps echoing off the metal walls, every shadow a potential threat. A figure stepped out from the darkness, a man in a worn jacket, his eyes nervous. "You the guys?" he asked, voice rough. "Yes." "You have information about Linda?" I questioned, my hand unconsciously resting near my concealed phone, ready to record. "Yeah. I've got names, dates, places. Everything you need to tie her to the laundering." "But I want protection," he demanded, his eyes darting around. "We'll ensure you get it," Eric reassured him, stepping forward to take the offered documents. As he handed over the papers, the faint sound of a click echoed in the vast space. We froze, turning towards the sound. The next moments were a blur, shouts, a scuffle, and then the piercing sound of sirens. As police swarmed the warehouse, a sense of relief washed over me, tempered by the knowledge that this was just the beginning. The storm was about to break, and Linda's empire would soon fall with it. The courtroom was packed, a buzz of murmured conversations filling the air as the final hearing in Linda's case was set to begin. I sat in the back row, my eyes fixed on the door through which she would enter. Beside me, Eric was a mask of nervous anticipation, knowing today would seal our shared journey either into vindication or deeper into peril. As Linda was led in, handcuffed, a murmur rippled through the crowd. She looked around, her gaze icy and calculating, until her eyes landed on me. The slight narrowing of her eyes was the only sign of her anger, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. The proceedings were a blur of legal jargon and testimonies, but one moment stood out. The prosecutor called a surprise witness, one I hadn't even been made aware of. The door at the side of the courtroom opened, and a figure stepped out, causing a collective gasp. It was Mike, Linda's right-hand man in the company, presumed missing after the investigation began. His appearance was disheveled, but his voice was clear and firm as he recounted detailed accounts of Linda's operations, implicating her beyond any doubt. Linda's facade finally cracked, her eyes wide with betrayal as she turned to look at Mike. "You traitorous snake," she hissed across the courtroom, the venom in her voice palpable. The judge called for order, but the damage was done. Linda's outburst only cemented her guilt in the eyes of everyone present. After the hearing, as Linda was taken away, defeated and furious, Eric turned to me, a question in his eyes. "How did you get Mike to turn on her?" I smiled, a cold, hard smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I didn't. He came to me." Turns out, Linda wasn't just betraying us, she betrayed everyone around her, even her most loyal. Mike was insurance she never knew we had. The victory was bitter, and as I walked away from the courthouse, I felt the weight of the entire ordeal begin to lift, but not in the way I had expected. There was no joy in this justice, only the stark realization of the cost of betrayal. Days turned into weeks, and the story of Linda's fall from grace became a cautionary tale in the business world. I had moved on, focusing on rebuilding my life away from the shadows of deceit. One evening, as I walked through the park, reflecting on everything that had transpired, my phone rang. It was Eric. His voice was urgent, shaky. "David, you need to see this," he said, barely containing his panic. "What's wrong?" I asked, a sense of foreboding washing over me. "It's Linda, she's made bail. Somehow, she's out. And there's more, she's gone. Disappeared. The authorities can't find her." A cold wind swept through the park, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Linda was out, and she would be angry, looking for retribution against all who had crossed her. "Stay low, Eric. We need to be careful," I warned, ending the call with a heavy heart. As I walked on, the rustle of leaves underfoot seemed like whispers of warning. The battle might have been won, but the war was far from over. Linda's betrayal had cut deep, but her vengeance would cut even deeper. Weeks passed without incident, and just when I thought Linda might have truly disappeared, I received a package at my doorstep. Inside was a single black rose and a note, written in Linda's elegant scrawl. "You can never escape the past, David. Enjoy your victory, it will be short-lived." With a sinking heart, I looked around, half expecting to see her watching from the shadows. But the street was empty, the chilling reminder of her promise hanging in the air like a spectre. Linda was out there, plotting her next move, and I knew that our paths would inevitably cross again. But for now, the quiet before the storm settled around me, and I prepared for whatever came next, knowing the end of this story was still unwritten.